We are surrounded by interesting and accomplished people here in Northern Nevada, and we're about to meet one of them. She's an adventurer. She climbs some of the world's highest mountains. She traipses across foreign continents and meets some interesting ethnic peoples. And we're about to have a conversation. Our guest is Ruth Kocour. She's a real estate agent here in Northern Nevada, but that's not why we're talking to her. We're talking to you about your avocation, which is mountain climbing and basically being an adventurer.
That's right, Brent, and thank you for having me on. What more fun than to be able to talk about what I love to do the most.
If I were to ask you to just impress us, brag a little bit about interesting places you've been, interesting things you've done.
Well, I've been to the Himalayas 16 times, Pakistan 3. Climbed 4 of the tallest summits on 4 of the continents and climbed on 6 of the continents. So of those, the most interesting would be probably still Pakistan.
Wow. This is, you have really done some interesting things. And I have, in fact, read your book about your Pakistan trips.
Thank you.
3 of them, walking the war zones of Pakistan.
Yes. Tell
us a little bit, because I know we have some great pictures that you took around K2. I'd like you to talk through us a little bit about how, well, I'll get into why later, how you ended up over in essentially a war zone.
Well, the Pakistan experience was about wanting to go and see the mountains there, primarily K2. So I spent years getting that permit, and this was in 1998. And then when I finally went there, all hell had broken loose, so to speak. We had just bombed the stronghold of Osama bin Laden.
Now this is K2.
This is K2, the second highest peak in the world. So my first trip was because I wanted to go and see K2. I wanted to experience the mountains. And my mountaineering background had drawn me to that motive. K2, the second highest peak in the world. My second trip in '99 was to walk the entire northwest border between Pakistan and Afghanistan, a tribal belt. And these are some of the people I met there. A young boy from Tajikistan, many ethnic groups. That whole area has seen many people migrate from other areas. That's a Pashtun elder there.
Now, why would you do this? Because you didn't go there to climb K2.
No, I did not. In fact, that was a distinction between that trip and others prior to that. I wanted to experience the area, and it was this image right here is one of the reasons I wanted to get out there, to see this wilderness. And the ethnic groups are just a part of it. The very way that they are able to survive in that environment was so impressive to me that I became more interested in the people than I did the mountains.
It seems like a very hostile environment, of course. And there you are, in fact, with a woman who looked like she's about half your size.
Yes, yes. The only person that I saw out on the China route into K2, a tiny Kyrgyz woman herding her goats.
A lot of people might think that Northern Nevada is inhospitable. I know that certainly the military has trained in places like our part of the country for Afghanistan. But when you get there, you find also similar to places like these, you find oases and places that sustain life.
Well, I find that people still have to conduct life no matter what's going on around them. That's the most impressive thing. And in Pakistan and along the border of Afghanistan, it's not just wars, it's natural disasters. And really the people are great. They're so inspiring in terms of their resilience and where they live and how great they are with strangers.
I'm surprised that you found the climbing guides that you did. Mm-hmm. Some of them, they varied in levels of experience, mm-hmm. but you were camping in one place that, as a matter of fact, was called the bombing range because of all the boulders that would fall on you.
Yes, a group of porters had been crushed by a boulder the size of a house the year before. It's a very active area. In fact, the entire Baltoro Glacier is very dynamic. It moves 4 inches a day and has earth tremors every 3 minutes. Not to mention these rock and avalanches. In fact, in April, 130 Pakistani soldiers were crushed in this very region when an avalanche came down, out there where the war continues, the war over Kashmir.
Now, we're going to talk about some of your other dangerous trips, and particularly on Denali a little bit later.
Yes.
But this seems like a very good time to ask, why? Of all the places you could go in the world, why do you pick the ones that are perhaps experiencing some ethnic strife, having wars, and are just hard to get to?
Well, Pakistan would be the one that you're really referring to. It was an evolution of interest. It started with mountaineering, and then I was led to be more interested in the people that were at the base of these mountains, or that were helping to get me to these mountains, or the villages that I had passed through. And they all have so much in common. The Sherpas of Nepal and Tibet are much like the Balti people of northern Pakistan. In fact, the Balti people, and that's an example right there, are descendants of Tibetans that actually migrated in that direction. So I started seeing all these connections, and I dealt with it in that way. I don't find that there are many distinctions. In fact, on a certain level, it's very hard to segregate people based on cultural differences.
And that is something that I've been curious about. You seem to find a common denominator in human beings wherever you go.
Thank you, and I do have that experience, and I work at it, and people know when I'm there that I'm interested in them. And I just give myself to the experience. I don't fight it. I'm there to learn about them, to be with them. They can show me their goat herd, their broken finger, their grandchild. I'm excited to see it. And when you have that kind of relationship, they treat me like family.
Well, you've certainly had some amazing experiences eating things that you never wanted to eat.
Oh, yes, many, many, many times, yes.
Playing medicine woman a few times.
Yes, I always carry aspirin, and it always seems to make people very happy when you can give them something. They know that we have great medicine. There's a difference between medicine and drugs. In Pakistan, you don't use the word drugs, you use the word medicine.
Because there are a lot of illegal drugs being made in that area.
Well, they grow them, not all of them, but marijuana grows all across the Himalaya, and they do cultivate it over there. And I was too high for any of the poppy fields, but it's a cash crop for some of them, but they don't actually use it, which is kind of interesting.
They just sell it.
They sell it. They actually eat the seeds of the marijuana plant because they believe it makes the body strong.
Really?
Yes.
Is there any of the drug, the THC, in the seeds?
I wouldn't know. I wouldn't know. But I walked through cultivated fields of marijuana that were juxtaposed with sweet peas. So I was eating sweet peas.
And
the whole way through.
And you seem to be basically unaffected by world politics as you go to these different areas.
Well, it's not that I'm unaffected or unaware. With Pakistan, it just seemed that if I didn't go, there would never be a window. I had watched it since the early 90s. I had my first permit to go there in the early 90s when the Gulf War broke out. My husband was alarmed, asked me to put it off or not do it at all is really what he wanted. And I ended up on Denali instead. I would have been better off going to Pakistan. But I had kept that contact alive so that in '97, when I thought, after watching it all those years, and I decided I wanted to go back, I thought I'm going to work at it, try and get back in touch with them. They didn't have email. It was very difficult communicating. And after a year of putting it together again, even though things fell apart over there politically, I thought, I'm just going to go, or I'm never going to go.
Most mountaineers that we hear, we think of going to climb the mountain.
Yes.
You basically worked your way around much of the base of K2 without going up the mountain.
Yes, and that was just fine. I just wanted to go and see it. By that time, I'd climbed enough mountains.
What about the glacier experience? And I hope that we're able to recall some of those photographs. Just vast amounts of ice that are bigger than anything I can picture, and yet moving.
Yes, these are some of the longest glaciers in the world. The Kocour Glacier is 39 miles long and moves a lot. And it's like a flowing river of ice. Now, this is part of the problem, crevasses on both Denali and on the Kocour Glacier. This is called a squeezer, and it's so named because when a victim falls into it, you inch down to the point that you can't take a last
Just because
breath.
of your body heat?
Body heat allows you to inch down.
Wow.
Yeah. You don't come out of those.
Now, we've actually switched mountains on you here.
Now we're on Denali, and what you're looking at, the event on Denali wasn't so much the climb, but the storm that hit us. I had been recruited to be part of an Everest team, just a routine climb up the normal southwest buttress route. When we got hit with the storm of the century, it left 7 people dead in as many days. By the time we left the mountain, 11 people dead. This is an aerial of us summiting. We were not only the highest team to survive the storm, the first to summit that year. So
and what was this year?
Oh, this was 1992, a long time ago. And this is one person who died in a tent adjacent to mine, simply fell asleep and never woke up. The scary thing about this was that he had made no mistakes. He had the best equipment, just as we did, the same equipment. His body had simply failed. What killed people on Denali was a combination of poor judgment, lack of experience, and extraordinary weather conditions. He had made no mistakes.
That is
He
scary.
was the first, he was the third one to die.
When we see the tents back in that last picture, do you have to just dig out around them every day?
Well, we had to build ice block walls before we even put up the tents. And then throughout the storm, about almost every hour, we had to go and dig out with the snow accumulation, so that by the end of the storm, our tents, from digging out, were 10 and 12 feet down in holes surrounded by ice block walls.
That is amazing.
With the accumulation of snow coming up, so that the ice block wall only was maybe 6 feet tall above a 12-foot deep hole.
And why was it necessary to build ice block walls?
To protect against the Arctic storms that hit so fast and without warning. Now, once we were in the storm, we had sustained winds of 110 and gusts to 120 miles an hour for a period of 10 days. Hurricane velocity. And while the violence of the actual motion was one thing, it was the sound that was so incredible. With sheer velocity, normally when we think of wind, we think of the sound that we hear is what's being blown, water, say in hurricanes, trees. That was the sound of unobstructed energy.
Wow.
I have a 50% hearing loss in my left ear from that experience.
From that
diagnosed
trip.
by a doctor, yeah.
And that was just from the wind blowing?
Constant.
Wow.
It sounded like a freight train barreling down on top of you. It's hard to describe.
So it actually could be, instead of just being cold and the ingress of air into your ear canal, it could actually just be exposure to noise like standing beside a jet engine.
Yes, and that is a very good analogy. Likewise, we had avalanches coming down all around us all the time. They were shaking the ground, and they sounded like bombs when they hit. So you could time the blast. You could hear them coming down the mountain, and then on impact, they sounded like bombs.
What an amazing experience.
Not one I would choose to repeat.
When you were in that severe wind, were you actually climbing, or did you basically just have to stay in camp?
The storm hit when we were making our way from 11,000 feet to 14,300 feet. Not very high, as many people in our area will know. But we went from crystal clear, calm blue skies to scrambling to put on clothing, protective clothing, but not fast enough, more than what we had. In other words, face masks. Within seconds, your skin felt as though, my face felt as though it was no longer part of my body. Your skin was flash freezing.
That's amazing.
It was, and the entire experience was like that. In fact, if you'd go out of your tent, you had to every hour to dig yourself out to keep from having your tent collapse. Even wearing goggles, your eyes would water from the wind. The tears would freeze across your eyes, and your eyelids would freeze shut when you went to blink to clear them. It was grim.
What do you do about that? I've often wondered about those little practical issues that you face.
Well, the living conditions were atrocious. You know, you'd wake up with the tent collapsed on top of you, snow loading, yet you had to inch your body out from under it so that it didn't, all you had was a fabric membrane protecting you from the turbulence. And you'd have to inch your way out from under that weight to keep the tent from collapsing. And then we had to use our food bowls. You'd unzip the tent door, use your food bowls to dig out through the drifts, and then crawl out carefully and begin digging out your tent every hour. In terms of the cold, you just stayed in your tent as much as you could, which only adds 10 degrees to the outside air temperature. The air temperatures on Denali were minus 47 and below. The wind chills exceeded the coefficients on wind chill charts. They were, minus 47 air temperatures, 110 mile an hour winds, which was below the coefficients of minus 150. In fact, we joked that by the time we'd return home to summer, because this was May into June, we would have spanned a temperature range of 240 degrees.
That is amazing. Now, how many days were you stuck in that environment?
We were pinned down at 14,300 feet, which does not sound that high, for 10 days. But that was the highest point on the mountain at which anyone survived the storm. Anyone who went higher either ended up being rescued or ended up in a body bag. But our decision was to stay put. It was as dangerous to go down as it was to go up. And we had a grim saying, people are dying to get off of this mountain.
That was literally true.
Right. And in addition, someone had stolen part of our food. And yeah, people do very strange things when they think they could die. Someone from another team had stolen roughly half of our food. You cache it in the snow. Mm-hmm. And so from the beginning of the storm on, we were on half rations and still completed and summited.
That is Remarkable. I think I would have just turned around and gone down. Now, you haven't been back to Denali.
Really. People, that's the point. We couldn't, and we knew that. It was as bad to go down as it was to go up.
But when you could move, you went up instead of down.
Yes, when the window came, we did. There were sensational rescues going on around us. A helicopter, a stripped-down Llama helicopter, did fly into 14-3 for 3 Koreans that had been trapped on an ice shelf for 3 days in an ice cave without food or water. And then a giant military helicopter flew in, and a Chinook, which is like having a house land in camp with you. And they were there for the Koreans. But for some reason, it was not something we chose to do or would have wanted to do. I think our decision to go onto the top was an acting out of the very force that had kept us alive. We had told ourselves we'd keep moving forward mentally, and going on kept us moving forward. Telling ourselves that kept us moving forward. People think this is crazy, and it is, but in a normal situation it would be, but your whole world was reduced to that experience that you were having. The whole world had just caved in on us. So that your mindset was something you just really couldn't break.
And that is something, I love your writing, but it's very matter of fact. There's not a whole lot of emotion to it.
No, very good that you've picked up on that. You had to remove yourself from emotion in order to deal with the crisis. Emotion was a distraction. Anything that pulled you out of the moment threatened your survival.
Now that's one thing to say, but you actually felt that. You actually lived that.
Had to do it. I mean, the minute what happened was on about day 7 of the storm, 7 or 8, we got word over our radio, which worked very sporadically because it was battery powered and it was too cold. But we heard over our radio from base camp that news of the storm was being broadcast globally on CNN. And I remember thinking, why did they have to tell everybody about this? First of all, it enhanced our sense of isolation because we knew that even though the entire world knew about us, there was nothing anyone could do to help us. And then I thought, now my husband, my parents know about it. Right away, when I felt myself worrying about them, I knew I had to pull back because it was so much just to survive. You couldn't let yourself think about that. Likewise, fear is a projection into the future. It's what could happen, not what is happening now. So it was critical to always stay in the moment and not fall behind in your thinking about what was going on. We were so busy staying alive.
That is an amazing experience. Now, this must have, in all fairness, I'm sure that she never entered into this thinking that it would be as life-threatening as it was. You didn't sign up for that particular trip.
No, I was an experienced mountaineer. This was a routine climb. Of course, you go to Denali because it's a weather climb. And the reason it is considered a good prerequisite for Everest is because the weather there is considered to be as bad, if not worse. One of the most violent environments, or weather-impacted environments on Earth, not always as violent as the experience we had.
But even though you didn't plan on that particular experience, there is something about mountaineering which has probably transformed your life. You changed the way you think about everything because of these experiences.
Oh, absolutely. Well, this one was a bell ringer for sure, a life-changing experience. But mountaineering in general has enriched my life, totally.
What does it do if you were to try to talk to someone to get them interested in mountaineering, and you were to try to give them an idea of how it would change their lives? What would you tell them?
Well, it's hyper-reality. It just enhances everything. And I mean, it's so beautiful, first of all. I find the visuals incredible. And it's miserable also. I should warn out to everybody. It's very miserable. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of mental toughness. But if you can get to the point where you can get past all that and enjoy the experience, it's quite phenomenal.
Now, how do you prepare for this? You do that just right from home, don't you?
Well, we live in Galena Forest, and we do have the Galena Trail right there. And for years, in fact, I was hiking that before they even laid out that trail. But for years, I've been picking up river rocks from Galena Creek, putting them in a pack and carrying them up. I don't do that day in and day out. You'd wear your body out. I do that just before a climb for about the last month. And I never carry weight downloaded for those of you who are training for a mountain climb. I also practice visualization, which is really important because I visualize the pain, the work, the effort it's going to take to reach the top. And then I visualize being on top. Visualization is a very effective tool if you can really apply it.
Yeah, but that sounds like you're visualizing the pain along the way.
You
if I
have
were to
to
visualize the pain of going to the gym, I don't think I'd get there in the morning.
You and my husband. He wants nothing to do with my experiences.
Well, in fact, I should talk about your husband a little bit and what brought you to Reno. You came here in the late 70s.
We did. He was with the ski industry, and we were transferred here, and he was running a distribution center for Solomon, and eventually brought the company here.
That is pretty impressive, and this is a great place for a skier. You actually met him on the slopes, didn't you?
Not really. I was living in Salt Lake City. I had just finished graduate school. I was working as a medical illustrator there, and someone introduced us. And it turned out we had been in college at Boulder at the same time and known all the same people and never known each other.
And so you came to this great place with all the ski resorts, and at that time you felt like it was fairly unexplored.
Well, I do. It took me about a week to adjust to Reno. And I remember the first week I was here, I went into a store with out-of-state checks, and they said, "Oh, you're from out of state?" And I said, "Yes." They said, "Once you've been here a year, you'll never leave." I said, "No, I won't last a year." And I fell in love with the place. And it's not just the mountains and Lake Tahoe and the skiing, which at first was my first draw. It was the Central Nevada even, and the Outback. The fact that we have so much here out there, and such wildlife and such natural things. It's a stark beauty. It's not in-your-face beauty, as I call it, but there's a lot here. And in fact, I find a lot of similarities in other areas of the world where I like to trek to northern Nevada. If you're up on Mount Rose looking out over northern Nevada, it looks very much like the Tibetan Plateau.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, we have some pictures of you in the Himalayas.
Yes.
That we should probably show as we talk about this. And talk a little bit about the people. I'm thinking you have an interesting perspective of the people of Reno because of coming here when you did, and because of traveling all over the world, and also other people.
Well, I was leading a group in the Everest region in '08. These are some of my friends. I don't do this professionally. Occasionally I'll pull together a group. But this was in the Everest region. And with us, of course, were the Sherpas, who are wonderful. That is actually a tribe of Tibetan descent and terrific people. And do we have another one there? There we go. That's also the Everest region.
With an American cap.
Yeah, right. Well, they all love those. And there actually is Everest in the background. I took those colored banners with me, but that's our group again. But this was more to take my friends to Everest Base Camp. But mostly I like to go very often alone with a local guide into the ethnic villages and get to know some of those people. Usually they're very difficult to reach. I don't mind being all alone in a culture where no one speaks my language or I don't speak theirs. We all have a great time.
Vietnam?
Vietnam, then I went all over Vietnam, took my husband. We went to visit the hill tribes in northern Vietnam. That was very interesting too, the Han people.
And you did that mainly for the people?
I do. I love these people. You know, being there, I was in their village. I had my husband up there with me, and he's not as happy about it as I am.
You've also brought some great artifacts here for show and tell. Tell us a little bit about these, what I would call boots for.
Perfect example. All right, what I have learned about traveling across the Himalayas is that so many of these people migrated and share many of the same, traditions and even some of the dress. So these are the Balti people of northern Pakistan. And they are actually Tibetans that migrated westward years ago. And in fact, in northern Pakistan, there are quite a few Buddhist carvings and all in the walls. Would you like me to show them this one here?
Yes, the headdress.
Okay, this is another one from northern Pakistan. This is the only non-Muslim ethnic group in northern Pakistan called the Kalish people. When I was there in '98, there were 3,000 of them left, of these people. Now there's only 900, I learned last year, because an insurgent route has opened up through their valleys from Pakistan into Nuristan.
And they find themselves in a war zone.
Well, what happens, exactly, there's a lot going on in their part of the world, and what happens is many of them have fled, and they are not veiled women, and they're fair-skinned, green-eyed, and so in that culture, to not have a veil on sends a signal that you're selling yourself for sex. It would be like running around in our culture topless, you know, it just gives that kind of signal. So you have to wonder, what's happened to them.
Well, I am amazed that you did so well in those areas of the country. As a 6-foot-tall blonde, you stand out a little bit.
You know, they treated me as an honored guest. And what people don't understand is that there is, especially among the tribal groups, a code of ethics that's been in place for over 2,000 years. And among their list of sort of commandments, one is honor of women, hospitality to anyone, regardless of nationality, race, or religion, honor of self, dignity, honor of the environment. And I believe that the Taliban thing, which is really who are the people that are known for the brutal repression of women, among other atrocities, I believe that's an aberration, and the underlying culture will prevail.
Wow, you have seen a lot of interesting things. And if you would like to learn a little bit more about Ruth Ann's experiences, you can visit her website, ruthann.kocour.com. You'll be able to see some of her books. For instance, the Facing the Extreme. This was the adventure that she experienced on Denali. You also have the book which I have read, Walking the War Zones of Pakistan, and you get to see some very interesting pictures. Ruth Ann, it has been a pleasure having you here.
Well, thank you, Brett.
Any parting 5-second words of wisdom?
You should love Reno. The place we live is great. We've got so much here, and just don't miss it.
You have seen the world, so you speak that with great authority.
And I always love coming home to Reno.
Well, thank you, Ruth Ann, and thank you for joining us for A Conversation.